My name's Brian Fraser, and I'm the coordinator of a project called Jesus, Jazz, and Worship. This is Tom Reynolds, a good friend who is vice principal at Emmanuel College at the Toronto School of Theology, the United Church College there. Teaches in the area of disability, hospitality, inclusion, but he is also an amazing jazz pianist. And so he's been one of the natural people that we've turned to in this project to help us reflect upon what are the dynamics. We've been trying to do a deep dive into the dynamics of what Jesus is doing through jazz in worship. It's been in large part funded by the Vital Worship grants from the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship. That in turn is funded by the Lilly Endowment, Inc., and so we're most grateful to them. We've had some money for research associates from Canada Summer Jobs Grant with the Government of Canada, and a little bit of funding from our national church, the Presbyterian Church in Canada. So we've just finished a 2-day series of conversations about jazz and spirituality. They followed an exercise where we interviewed about 70 jazz musicians, ministers, people organizing the jazz services, and people who attended the jazz services. And so we have a summary of those interviews. They were designed to find out what those people were experiencing in their language, so that the scholars call it what's their construction of reality. And so we have a rich, and Tom's been through this stuff, and we hope to continue the project in some way, shape, or form to dig even deeper into that rich mix of how people put their lives together, understand their lives, their music, the relationship between jazz and spirit and spirituality, the language they use to talk about that, so that those of us that come out of perhaps a more orthodox understanding of Christian spirituality can really enter into a genuine dialogical engagement with them. So what you will see in the rest of this video is clips from those conversations over the last couple of days. Tom has done 2 or 3 little kind of short TED Talk sort of things on themes, but has been doing a lot of listening. There weren't a lot of us here, but the conversations were remarkably rich. So, with that long introduction, I'm curious about the themes that emerged for you as most powerful and most provocative and intriguing.
Yeah, there were several that struck me in our conversation, and I think the first is the very word conversation. The fact that this was a collaborative, dialogical engagement with one another really embodied something about the jazz itself. Yeah. Jazz as conversational. And through each conversation, there is transformation that happens among the people that are conversing together. And one of the root words that resonates with conversation is conversion. So conversation is a conversion to and with each other, to each other. And through that, we become something more than we were before. Well, and I think that happened.
So I'm thinking of one of the people that you'll probably hear a little bit from on the tape is a woman by the name of Naomi. We did not know Naomi before this morning when she came to the event. She found out about it on social media, and she said at the end of the afternoon, she said, "These conversations really changed me. They changed the way I think about church." She's an amateur jazz musician. And it was a wonderful embodiment of precisely what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so that theme really resonates. Yeah. And I think another theme is this very notion of resonance.
Yes.
That when differences engage one another, the sounding of those differences creates a common sense of resonance together that plays off one another. And we talked about the definition of beauty as a harmony of contrasts.
From Whitehead.
That comes from Alfred North Whitehead.
Yeah, and the whole process thought and process theology, which is big for you.
And how that can actually make sense of what goes on in the jazz performance, as well as in a community of diversity, differences engaging one another productively, each having gifts
Yep.
And sometimes there's tension in those gifts.
Well, and I remember the first reflection you did, at least to see if I remember this correctly.
Yeah.
There were three aspects, three qualities of community. There was tension,
Dissonance.
that,
Yeah.
and then call and response. Can you say a little bit more about those three?
Well, and all three of those are not sequential in any way,
No.
but almost interrelated, that sometimes it's the tension that's productive of being together. And that's embodied in the jazz performance as musicians play off one another as different voices, piano, drums, bass, vocal, horn instrument. And it's those instruments and the different creative responses that people have together that creates a tension, but also compels the music forward as each responds to another. So call and response, tension and release, together in a kind of oscillating momentum that's dynamic and forward moving, rather than tension as something to be scared away from, like
well, and I think you were
twine to be cut.
The image that was one of the images that really said how because we're uncomfortable with tension, we want to cut it.
Yeah, because it's
and that doesn't allow any release.
That's right.
It just destroys any possibility.
Well, to get rid of tension is to exclude, to get rid of, rather than think about possibilities for response. And so that's what I like about the term dissonance. First thing you hear musically in dissonance is you want to, get rid of that. But actually, dissonance can be an invitation to build community and hold up things and add more voices to create a greater harmony that upholds that without dissolving it.
One of the people you'll hear a little bit from in the clips that follow this is Dan Reynolds, who's our music director here at Brentwood. And listening to Dan and to Tom, they're both pianists, jazz pianists. And so listening to them both in the conversations but also in the informal times, and they'd come up and they'd start playing away at the piano and they'd both have their fingers going. And it was Dan texted his mom texted him last night and said, "So how was it?" And she said, "I just got one word back." He said, "Wonderful." So it was great to connect you two. And Tom
he's brilliant.
Did a concert on Thursday night with a couple of our local musicians, Paul Rushka on bass and Christian Brathen on drums. And so we'll make sure that somewhere within this collection of this glimpse into the conversations we've had, there's a link to that concert, because Ken Burke and Burkeville Productions, Marvin and Leah, wonderful AV people, did the concert as well. So,
one theme that came out of that with the notion of resonance and sometimes tension is the hunger for connection.
I thought that was
deeply
a powerful,
spiritual.
And that certainly comes out in the interviews.
It did.
You caught the hunger, which I think is there. The other piece that struck me was what I called the hybridity. So this is, we started calling this project the Jesus Jazz and Worship Project, and then realized early into the interviews that most of the jazz musicians, I mean, we knew this, but most of the jazz musicians we work with would not identify as Christian. And so they talked about spirituality. So we decided for the consultation, we'd shift back to that more generic language, partly to respect where they are. And so we see it very much in terms of dialogical evangelization. They know they're coming to play in a Christian service of Christian worship. We're very clear in the prayers, in the order of service that we use, that this is Canadian Presbyterians, I would say their theological stance is reconciling orthodoxy. So it's that God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, not holding the sins against them, so not using that in an exclusionary way, but making us ambassadors of that message of reconciliation. And so we don't make any apologies for that in the service or in the stuff around the bulletin or in the message, but we want to make sure that we're there's respectful dialogue with wherever they may be in their searching.
Well,
I love the fact that you brought the searching. Sorry.
Well, no, one thing that came up is this spiritual, they name it in these interviews. Recognition of something spiritual in the music going on.
Yeah, there was nobody in the interviews that denied that reality in their composing and their playing.
So it's the recognition that maybe something of God is happening in that creative expression is a beautiful thing to witness.
Well, and
it's
you
a
were
way.
talking, if you can remember it, in your closing prayer, and we'll make sure that's included in the clips. But this sense of the pervasive energy of God.
Right.
That's central to process theology as well. But
It's central to the doctrine of creation,
exactly.
that God is an ongoingly creative God and a redeeming God.
Yes.
That engages the world and with the world, and every event is an event that radiates with possibility. And so the human creative act taps into that energy that's already going on.
Yeah.
And it's a way to recognize the image of God.
Yep.
It's a way to recognize something sacred in the creative, artistic event.
You used a phrase this afternoon. It was one of those, I often talk about having BFOs, which are blinding flashes of the obvious.
Okay, I love it.
So the phrase this afternoon was when you said, witness as witness.
Yeah.
Right? And that's so foundational to who we are as Christians. And so that's, fear not, I am with you.
Right.
And that's essentially what we're saying. Look, this is the nature of reality.
Well, Emmanuel, God with us.
God with us.
And so if that's lived out in ministry, it's a ministry of accompaniment and a joining with.
Yes.
That a lot of work on mission now is starting to realize it's not doing to or for, but being with, and in that process, something of a leavening of the world happens.
Yeah, the leavening imagery you used a couple of times, and that's powerful too. And that whole sense that, and I think it's, we had a hunch about the hunger and a hunch about how we could accompany people in that hunger here at Brentwood, but it's growing. But it's that sense of we have this wonderfully warm, acoustically resonant space.
Decent instruments. Yeah.
Some pretty good jazz musicians hanging around here. But how do you make that available to people who have a passion and a discipline for a particular way of being in the world that, as we've talked about, is with the Spirit?
Well, Adele said it beautifully when she used the word sanctuary today.
Yeah.
It's very obvious in the conversations that happen that the jazz musicians find this a home where they can be supported, appreciated, and the creative energy can happen, where it's safe place to be creative. It's church as sanctuary in a real way, and it became clear to me as an outsider witnessing that. So something good is happening.
Well, and I'm so delighted that you're part of what's happening, and you very much are part of it.
Appreciate the invitation.
We talk about participants here at Brentwood, and you are now a full participant
I'm
in
grateful.
the work and witness of Brentwood. So thank you so much for being here. We look forward to the ongoing conversations.
Well, likewise. And can I ask a question? Where do you see this going as a next step?
I have no idea. One of the things we were talking about was that sense of openness and anticipation and hope. And so it's, if I had to put words to it, it would be, I see it deepening and broadening. So it's a deepening of our understanding of what God is doing through that community with whom we've decided to be in companionship, and for whom we've decided to create space or make space available. I mean, the space here was gift to all of us. And it's wonderful musical space. We haven't had a musician come in here who hasn't said, "Whoa, is this ever a nice place to play?" In the interviews,
everybody compliments the acoustic environment, the warm welcome they receive. So
and for me, I see it deepening my understanding of how God's working in the world. So one of the things that we've started to explore, and we were talking a little bit about it in the conversations the last couple of days, is looking again at that old Reformation doctrine of the invisible church. So this sense that God's work is not confined to the visible church, and how do we stay in dialogue with, respectful connection with, companionship with the places in the world where God's desire is being lived out in justice and in kindness and in humility. And as you talked about so eloquently, jazz is a music of justice and of kindness and of humility. You know, there's that humility, that vulnerability, that openness to being confronted and challenged and invited to grow. That's essential to that community. Vijay Iyer, who's a wonderful New York-based pianist, but is involved in developing the jazz program at Harvard, in an article in Downbeat a few months ago, said with he and his students and his faculty, they've tried to define jazz as a mode of music, and they found it increasingly difficult to do that. Like, what's the quality of jazz? I don't know, you can come up with. And so what they finally said was, it's not a mode of music, it's a community. It's a community that plays jazz. And every time they play it, it's going to be different.
It's a way of
and
being
it's going to
together.
defy that kind of categorization. I love that. I think that's great.
Well, in a certain way, that's what you are here at Brentwood, a jazz community in a way, open to surprises, open to transformation, and being together in a unique way. Yeah, it's been beautiful to witness.
Well, thank you so much for being with you or being with us and being with you.
Wow. Yeah.
And I look forward to the ongoing conversations, and I hope you folks enjoy the conversations that you'll hear in the rest of this segment. Thanks so much.
Thank you.